This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. Welcome to our audio webcast of the Security Studies Roundtable of November the 6th, 2012. Our guest at this roundtable is Professor Marc Milner, noted Canadian naval historian at the University of New Brunswick, who shares with us some fascinating new interpretations and evidence regarding the Canadians' role in the D-Day landings of June 6, 1944, and the subsequent day's fighting around Caen.
Thank you very much. I didn't think you'd take time to read all that. It's great to be back, and I say great to be back because my first book, North Atlantic Run, was actually launched at the Royal Canadian Military Institute in 1985, and Charles Stacey was present, and it was obviously over in the old place. And that was the last time I spoke to you, and now I'm on to something completely different. I should preface my remarks by saying this is an old story for me, and you'll see in a moment I've got a few overheads to show you. My father landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, and I have been living with the Normandy campaign my entire life. So my little sidetrack into naval history was kind of a personal foray, but right to the moment my father died in 2006, he was still asking me questions like, if closing the Falaise Gap was so darn important, where was everybody else? How come it's just us and the Poles who were down there? And I could not answer him, but that began the process of thinking about this. So the result of all this in some ways is both of long standing, but it's also quite accidental. I backed into this. Can you have the next slide, please? In three ways. Okay, three things influences the story. I'd like to say that I had an epiphany in which I discovered that the official history of the Canadian Army written by the venerable Charles Stacey was all wrong. It didn't happen that way. It started in some ways with my father as a personal story, and I'm going to share that a little bit with you today. Because although my father was largely an uneducated man, he read enormously after the war and kept asking me questions which was impossible for me to answer. He also had a very different take on the Canadian Army. He would say things like, if we were so damned inefficient, I guess we must have been, because we only kept 80% of the German tanks around us for most of 2 months. I mean, it's just awful. Anyway, he's still not forgiven Patton, or didn't at the time of his death, for going to Paris instead of coming to help them at Falaise. So there's a personal connection. I then began to look at the ground. And the personal connection, I should say, as too late in my life, I began to poke into my father's regimental history, 13th Field. Then there was the ground. In 1997, I began to take battlefield study tours over, sponsored by the Canadian Battlefields Foundation. And I've been over the ground now, I think 12 or 15 times. So, you know, it's fairly familiar. And you get to the ground and you start scratching your head and you're going, well, you know, I've read all the official histories. I've read all the accounts. I've read the war diaries. I've looked at all the photographs. And I'm standing on the ground, and this doesn't make any sense to me. Right? One of the simple things is, if the Americans break out from the blockage, they're breaking out into essentially open country, which is, I guess, what you want to do. If the British break out from Caen, they're breaking out into a forested area. You get down to the Mont d'Ormel, where the Polish monument is, and the whole thing just funnels right into a heavily forested area. You're thinking, okay, what is it you're breaking out to? And the textbooks don't tell us. So the ground began, for me, to raise a whole bunch of really, I think, pretty fundamental questions, because I looked at it and I said, I can't read the history and square it with what I'm seeing on the ground. So I went back to basics, which is, I guess, what all historians should do. I stopped reading the books. I went back and started reading the archives. Okay, the next one, Chris. So, yeah, the other way. So there's my dad, 13th Field, landed with the headquarters of 13th Field right behind the Seaforths, about 8:30 in the morning, about where the Juno Beach Center is. If you've been there where the Cross of Lorraine is, my father would have told you that commemorates not only Charles de Gaulle, but that's exactly where he landed, on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. And I went there in '93 with him, and we had even, you know, had a 2-week seminar, again with the questions. This doesn't make any sense. What the hell are we doing down here? Where's everybody else? All that kind of stuff. You know, and you begin to look at the fields of fire around Caen, and you realize that it's largely open, and it's largely flat. And the battle has to be fought that way because you can't get forward in short tactical bounds. It has to be 2,000 to 3,000 meter tactical bounds. So my dad had a lot of questions, and as you can judge, a fairly powerful influence on me. He started me on historiography. We went to see The Longest Day. I was about 12, totally pumped up. My father stepped out of the theater standing on the sidewalk crying. We were there. Why didn't they talk about us? Right? Next one. Taking students around, I've done that now. I've taken undergrad students, graduate students, private tours, went around with my dad actually in '93, with Toby Graham, who was my predecessor at UNB, a very distinguished military historian and British gunner from the Second World War. I've also taken 2 RCR officers and NCOs around the battlefields, and we've talked about them in seminar. So I had a lot of questions, and I kept coming back to this piece of ground west of Caen and the ground that the Canadians were operating. If you know anything about the Normandy campaign, you'll know that the British 3rd Division is supposed to take Caen. The airborne divisions take the high ground across the Caen Canal and the Orne River. The Americans, the 50th Division is supposed to take Bayeux. The Americans are supposed to land on their beach, get to Saint-Lô and to Carentan, and then 4th Division has a clear point. What is it the Canadians are supposed to do? Well, you probably all know that their job is to land on the beaches of Normandy and get in the space in between and hold. Sometimes they'll tell you what they're supposed to do is to cut the highway between Caen and Bayeux. And so if you read the op order for everybody says get ashore, dig in, defend yourself against counterattacks. Everybody has the same task, except we appear to have this kind of nebulous task in the middle, in the space. And I thought, well, okay, well, but when I started looking at the ground, I thought, this is really interesting ground. This is right at the head of 2 major corridors that go all the way back to the sea. That's kind of neat. So it's not the east-west stuff they're worried about. It's the north-south stuff they're worried about. Next one, please. And what tweaked me to what was going on, I know this is not quite focused. We had to pull it back a little bit further, I think, to Chris, to get it in focus. But I found this. This is a drawing. Maybe that's a little better. I still can't read it. Anyway, this is a redrawing of the fortress positions that are in the 3rd Canadian Division op order. Actually, the artillery op order. These are the brigade positions that they're supposed to assume. This is Caen. Bayeux is just off the map up here. 7th Brigade, 9th Brigade around the Carpiquet airfield. 8th Brigade's back here in reserve. And what really got me going on this, I was working on my father's artillery regiment, is check out the guns behind them. Normal British infantry, British Commonwealth Infantry Division has 3 regiments of artillery, 72 guns. 3rd Canadian Division has 144 field guns assigned. It has a medium regiment assigned. It has 2 batteries of 90mm self-propelled Royal Marine artillery assigned. And, right up in here in bits and pieces, it has the entire 48 guns of the 262nd British anti-tank regiment. They're all 17-pounders. It's the entire 1st Corps heavy anti-tank capability. So I thought, well, that's really neat. That's kind of interesting. This must be like they're in the middle, so they must be providing fire support to everybody else. You go back and read the op order and you realize that, well, that's a possibility, and they did that. All of those units are under command of 3rd Canadian Division for D-Day and for the beachhead operations. British 3rd Division landing to their left lands with 5 regiments, 3 for the division, 2 for the airborne bridgehead. 50th Division landing to their right or to the east has 4 field regiments and 1 heavy regiment, and they're the leading element of 30 Corps artillery. There's nobody else that lands on D-Day that has the same kind of firepower that 3rd Canadian Division has. It's just a staggering amount of firepower, and it's all there for. Oh, gee, who's the gunner? I've forgotten his name. I don't know the senior's moment here. Excuse me. Yeah, it'll come to me. So I'm looking at this, scratching my head and going, there's something going on here that I'm not aware of. I don't know what it is at this stage, but it's like, that's really neat. Why all the guns? Well, we have the next one. So what I did is I went back and started looking at the planning under Cossack, under Freddie Morgan's staff, which was formed in March of 1943. Their original conception of how the battle is supposed to go, and trying to find out where we as Canadians fit in the conception of the battle. In other words, go back to the original intent. And they're concerned about 2 areas in Normandy. The plan, as we'll see it, is that, and here's Bayeux, if you can't figure it out, I realize I can't even read it this close. Gone down here. The original Cossack plan is to land north of Bayeux with 3 divisions. And there's going to be a British division, as it turns out, to the east. I'll get east and west mixed up. Canadians in the middle on what becomes Gold Beach for the Brits in the final plan. And then an American division up here, either right around Port-en-Bessin or maybe a little bit further west on Omaha where they eventually land. So the 3 divisions are going to land. And what the Brits are concerned about in the original staff planning is 2 areas. Because they all know that horse-drawn infantry divisions aren't going to beat them. It's the motorized and panzer divisions that are going to hurt them. And there's 2 areas. Can we have the next transparency, please? The key area that they're really concerned about is this area either side of the Mule River Valley. And if you already know something about where the Canadians fetch up, one Canadian Brigade fortress here at Carpiquet, the other Canadian Brigade fortress here around Puto and Bretteville. These are 2 big corridors that run right down to the sea. And so Cossack staff planning has identified those as early as September of 1943 as one of the key areas where they expect a major German panzer counterattack in the event of a landing on the beaches of Normandy north of Bayeux. The other area, you have the next one, it's just up here on a little flat plain that runs northeast from Bayeux down towards Courcelles-sur-Mer, which is right here. And this is what became known as the Somerville-Basseville Ridge. And the Brits thought, the Cossack staff planners thought the Germans would do one of 2 things. They'll either concentrate here on good tank country, or they'll bring everybody in by road to Bayeux and then radiate attacks down this ridge onto the D-Day positions. Get the next one, please. So this is the original Cossack plan as it is in July, the one that's authorized by the Chiefs of Staff to land 3 divisions led by 1st U.S. Army. And what's really neat about this, I didn't realize it, and I'm working on a book on this, is the 1st U.S. Army is the lead formation that's going to take command of the 3 divisions. 1 Brit, 1 American, 1 Canadian. The next army that's scheduled to deploy as an army in Normandy is not 2nd British Army, it's 1st Canadian. 2nd British Army will then arrive sometime later in the campaign as more British formations arrive. Right to the end of 1943, the plan is to have a balanced force of Brits, Americans, and Canadians in the Normandy operation, with all 5 Canadian divisions and 2 armoured brigades alongside about 5 American divisions and about 6 British divisions by the end of the first month ashore on D-Day. So we're going to be big players in this. Freddie Morgan's Cossack plan includes Canadians as one of the dominant elements. At one point in the fall of 1943, D-Day was going to be an all-North American operation with Brits attached to Canadians, which I think is kind of cool, and I can talk about that at some point. So the planning is to land airborne forces around the side to try to get to Bayeux, but basically to get up on the Somerville-Basseville Ridge, use the Soul River as a kind of anti-tank ditch, and then make a dash for Caen, probably with the British Infantry Division. And this is at a time when the Atlantic Wall has not been really built, and there are very few mobile German divisions available. But they've already identified the key pieces of ground. And what's kind of interesting is we're smack in the middle of this plan right from the get-go, and we're going to be sitting right up here on the one piece of ground which under the original Cossack plan they figured the Germans will try to hit fustus with the mostest with armor. I can't find a smoking gun on this. I can't find staff planning papers, I can't find memoirs, I can't find documents that say we'll put the Canadians right where the tanks are going to be. But that's actually where they're going to put them. But they're going to put them where they anticipate the German armor will be. Next one. So in 1943 there were not very many mobile divisions in the Normandy theater. There was a mechanized division at Saint-Lô, and they reckoned that there was an armored division, or perhaps a Panzer Grenadier division, out at Lisieux. And they figured there's a couple of options for these. But the options in all these, what's really is they remain the same despite the changing nature of Allied planning and the increase in German strength in the area. And the 2 areas that they identify is this area to the west of Caen, either side of the Mule River Valley, and the debate in fall of 43 is whether this unit will move straight on the Americans or whether it will go to Bayeux first and then come down the Somerville-Basseville Ridge. Next one. So there are variations on all this all through the fall of 1943, but the one consistent thing I would submit to you is the importance of this piece of ground either side of the Mule River Valley. They did an intelligence appreciation in early September, came up with 3 possible options. The first one that they thought, given the scale of the initial landings, was that they would probably concentrate on Bayeux and then radiate attacks out. Thought that was probably going to be option 1. Option 2, possibility, that they would line up their attack formations along the Caen Bayou Road and move north, primarily with infantry to start with, and then bring armor forces in behind. Based on the planning that they're coming up with now, with the movement of other mechanized forces in the area, the third option, and the one that they seem to prefer, thought that the Germans would do, is to concentrate armor west of Caen, either side of the Mew River Valley, and do it, an attack forward in 2 stages. Catch the Brits as they try to swing out and capture Caen, a kind of coup de main on D+1, advance to the Soule River Valley, line up again, and then probably on D+3, attack across the Soule into the main landing beaches and roll them up. But this is the area that they're focusing on, either side of the Mew River Valley. Chris, next one. So there it is by September. That's kind of the conception of the plan that Cossack is working with. 3 divisions landing, the Canadians in the middle in this one, holding the crucial piece of ground up here. Possibility of some attacks radiating out of Bayeux, but the one they think that's really going to matter is this one. And that the Germans would line up with a mechanized division, an infantry up there, an infantry division in here, and 2 armored divisions right on this key piece of ground. And they would head straight up, catch the Brits in flank, roll up the force that's headed for Caen, then turn left, come across the Soule River and roll up the landings. So this is a crucial piece of ground as early as September 43 in strategic planning for the Normandy operation. Next, please. Variation on that, that came out in late September when they war gamed it. They're going to get a little bit of doubt about whether the Germans will wait to build up forces and attack down here, or whether they'll just pile on day 1. And so in late September they're thinking, okay, well maybe there's actually 2 options. If they try to move instantly, they're going to come this way. If they're going to wait a day or 2, they're probably still going to do this thing. Next one. New D-Day scenario, not much changed, except that more weight shifted up into the Bayou area. They're still wrestling with the 2 pieces of ground. Chris? And the final assessment, the terrain assessment that was done in October, this was done as a German staff study. They pretended they were German staff officers planning to deal with an Allied landing, and so it's all written from the point of view of what we're going to do to check the Allied advance. And the Bayou pivot, as they called it, is a pretty important part of that plan. And if this Bayou pivot had actually worked, they would have smashed right into 3rd Canadian Division, which would have been holding this area up here. Or if they persisted in this one, under the original Cossack plan, they would catch the Brits trying to move down to Caen. Curiously enough, one of the key elements, and I didn't see it much in the discussion of D-Day planning, one of the key elements of Morgan's plan for D-Day is always to take Caen with the airborne forces, and then move in and relieve them with mobile forces in D+1. Okay. Now when Montgomery changes the plan, at the end of January, he comes up with his initial plan. He expands the beachhead, right? It goes from a 3-division assault to a 5-division assault plus 3 airborne divisions. The airborne divisions are not part of the plan yet as it's shaken out. So he moves from this original 3-division landing here and basically moves the Anglo-Canadians east and the Americans move a little bit west. And when Cossack, Freddie Morgan's staff looks at this initially, they say, okay, well, here's the deal. Again, the 2 options. This armored division, actually it's a Panzer division, but they've already now identified as 12th SS, Hitler Youth Panzer Division, will almost certainly move west of Caen, line up on the Caen Bayou Highway on both sides of the Mew River Valley, and go charging right up the corridors to the sea. And one of the reasons why the Brits say that you have to take Caen on D-Day is not simply because it's a road net, but Caen is an enormously good defensive position if what you're trying to do is to stop the Germans from getting on the other really good Panzer ground, which is just to the north here. So if you can actually get the river line, if you can get the urban area, if you can get the bridges blown, you can stop the Germans, which means if the plan is to take Caen on D-Day, there is only really 2 places the Germans have left to go. They're going to have to go west of Caen to get on either side of the Mew River Valley, or they're going to have to radiate attacks out of Bayeux to the beachhead. And so Bayeux has to fall quickly, and it does, and it's quite remarkable how little historians say about how quickly Bayeux falls to the 50th Division. It's one of the great accomplishments of the Normandy campaign, and it's almost just a little anecdote at the end of the paragraph. Oh, and on D+1, 50th Division finally moved into Bayeux and captured it. Wow. It's a really important road hub. It's important to the Germans, it's important to Allied planning, but it gets this kind of little, well, it was a success, so, you know, how hard could it have been? Right? 50th Division does really well. Next one. The expansion of the plan confuses things a little bit. The Americans get stuck into this, the Brits get stuck into it, and so does SHAEF, 21st Army Group. And they begin to scratch their head and go, oh my goodness, now what is the Germans will do now? Because we've expanded the front, so it's not just Caen, it's not just Bayeux. One of the major threats may well be to the Cotentin Peninsula, because they know if we're going to land here, we're probably going for Cherbourg. So the Panzer Division that's down in Rennes, 21st Panzer, will probably move up the coast to the Hay de Puy, and the Americans will then be threatened by a Panzer formation. Maybe. But it never works out that way. They know that 352nd is now at Saint-Lô. They know that 12th SS is out at Lisieux. They know there's a couple of Panzer divisions within about 36, 48 hours drive. And they know that 21st Panzer, which the intelligence report says is exceptionally equipped. The initial intelligence reports, actually right through to about the 9th of June, 3 days after D-Day landings, say that 21st Panzer is equipped with Panthers and Tigers, and therefore presents a formidable threat to the beachhead. Right? And actually, the briefing that Dempsey gets on, I think it's the 22nd of May, 1944, the in summary says, just thought we should let you know, there's 550 German tanks between the Seine and the Loire River. We expect 500 of them to be in British First Corps sector on D-Day. That's 3rd Canadian Division, 3rd British Division. 500. And oh, by the way, most of them are Panthers, and we think a fair number of them are Tigers. There's a few Mark IVs, but mostly special equipment. So often you read accounts of how the Brits, you know, lap dash on D-Day when they get attacked by a Panzer division. I think they read the intelligence summary and said, this is just the thin end of the wedge. This is the beginning of the wave. We can't get overextended. So I think you can cut the Brits a bit of slack for being slow on D-Day. Can we have the next one? Couple divisions up at the front, but the important thing here, and I got that one wrong. I'm not technically savvy. I couldn't change it to 716. It's 776. It should be 716. What's really neat is right at the last moment, before the operation goes in, all the literature talks about how the 352nd Division appeared on the cliffs over Omaha Beach. And when you read Eisenhower's first report to Marshall at the end of the day on D-Day, he said O Beach, which he called it, not Omaha, O Beach was particularly tough in part because there was a whole German division on the beach. A whole German division. That survives in the literature. It survives in the report to Roosevelt. It survives in the post-war report. All of 352nd Division apparently was here on the beach when the Americans landed. Actually, there were 2 battalions. It was almost enough. There were 2 battalions. The other were back here. One whole German regiment from 352nd spends the whole day chasing gummy pooping. You know what gummy pooping are? Little rubber men dropped by parachutes. They spend the whole day racing around down here looking for those little rubber men. And then at the end of the day, someone says, my God, you have to get back to the front, do something. And they send one more battalion off to try to stop the Americans. They send 2 battalions of the only frontline infantry division in Normandy off to attack British 50th Division, and British 50th Division destroys them completely. According to German accounts, out of the 2 battalions, there's 90 German troops report at the end of the day back to their headquarters. And I defy you anywhere in the literature to find anything anywhere that talks about the destruction of the German strategic reserve in the Bayeux area by the Brits. It's just a footnote. Oh, and by the way, we bumped into the 2 battalions of 352nd, and we just destroyed them and just walked right through them. Something going on there. I don't know what happened. They might have hit it with naval gunfire. Sorry, I digress. Here's the real kicker for the Canadians, and Dempsey knows this. I think Harry Currar knows it. I'm not sure that Rod Keller knows it, but almost certainly he does. This is where 21st Panzer Division is on D-Day. The headquarters is just down here. There's a whole Kampf group of 21st Panzer right behind the Canadian beaches on D-Day. 21st Panzer fights the 3rd Canadian Division on D-Day. It fights 3rd Canadian Division on D+1 and D+2. It's not in the literature. If you read the accounts, it's all about 12th SS. And if you look at where it is, it's right on this crucial piece of ground. So when the battle starts, I think we have one more. Maybe we don't. Is that the end of it? Okay, that could be a couple of... When the battle starts on D-Day, everybody knows about the attack on... Everybody knows about Normandy, knows about the attack on British 3rd Division by 21st Panzer. Gets all the way to the beach. Right? That's part of the literature. What nobody knows is that this part of 21st Panzer, which is a Kampf group, primarily infantry, made up of a battalion with some assault guns and some half-tracks, actually withdraws and forms a line right across in front of the Canadians for D+1. And they begin to fight a delaying action until the rest of the Panzer formations can come up. And 21st Panzer, 12th SS, and Panzer Lehr are ordered on D+1 to launch a Panzer counterattack between here and across the front to just about Saint-Croix-le-Grand-Tun, which is just over here. And when that fails on D+1, they're then ordered to line up on the Combayou Highway and attack down either side of the Mew River Valley to the sea. It doesn't quite come off the way the Germans want, because they end up dissipating so much of their strength trying to stop 3rd British Division, which never takes on D-Day. It doesn't take it for a month. Panzer Lehr comes up in bits and pieces, including one whole battalion which is shredded by naval gunfire, just disappears. 12th SS guys drive through it later and they see bits and pieces of vehicles and people in the trees, and it just freaks them out. Just a guy, an OP with a radio, saw them moving, and they hit him with, I don't know if it's cruiser, probably Belfast, 9 6-inch guns, rapid fire. Gone. They then line up, and there's a series of battles that rage for 4 days between 12th SS and 3rd Canadian. And one final point, and then I'll stop because I've already talked too long. If you read the accounts, everybody says this is a one-on-one. One Canadian division fighting one German armored division over open ground, and the Germans stop them or send them packing in the case of the North Novas. When the North Nova Scotia Vanguard and 9 Brigade advances here on D+1, one battalion, the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, some support from the Cameron Highlanders, no support from their artillery regiment because it's offline, so they're fighting without artillery for about 7 hours. The Germans have 74 field guns lined up around here. They brought up one whole battalion of Mark IV tanks, and they brought up one regiment of 12th SS, which is 25th Panzer Grenadier Regiment. So you say, okay, one Canadian battalion attacked by 2nd Battalion, 12th SS, odds are fairly even, and the Germans win, so they must be better. You can read that in every British book that's written about it, every American book that's written about it. Well, maybe, except the Germans have artillery support and we don't, for reasons I'm prepared to talk about afterwards. And on top of that, if you look at the strength of 12th SS, they're overstrength companies. All the stuff that's dismissed as hyperbole in the literature, the Canadians said, oh, the Germans came across the field en masse. You know, looked like a whole battalion coming. Well, actually it was, but the company's strength was 245 men. So when the German 12th SS battalion attacks you, it has almost twice as many infantry as you're defending with. Plus the Germans have all their field artillery out. The Novas and the Sherbrooks do a fantastic job here. The Sherbrooks all say, we shot a whole bunch of vehicles. And you can go through the war diary and it'll tell you, you know, we got this bandit and we got that bandit, or whatever it is they call it. And you read the historians, they go, oh, that's just Canadians. They're all smoking something, because we all know that only 12 tanks from 12th SS got destroyed. There's a little camp group of 21st Panzer in here with self-propelled guns, with half-tracks, with rocket launchers, with an ersatz battalion from 716th Division. I put all the figures together, and my guesstimate in this battle alone, the North Nova Scotia's Vanguard, even with the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, probably outnumbered 4-to-1 in strength. They have to cut through a whole Kampf group before they even meet the 12th SS. And then everyone says, well, the Sherbrooks, you know, they inflated their figures. I don't think so. I think they're shooting 21st Panzer vehicles. Then they said, but their comment that they were all killed by Tiger tanks, because everything that has a long barrel at this stage of the war is a Tiger tank. Just ridiculous. Well, not really, because what the Germans have in here is the 200th Heavy Anti-Tank Battalion, which has a PAC 43, 44, L100 88mm gun on a towed mount. The barrel's about as long as this building. Right, you guys over there will know that better than me. they're shooting Sherbrouks at 3,000 meters and braces of guns. So they're being shot by 88s, they just don't happen to be mounted in Tigers, right? They're actually towed, and they're quite low and they're very effective. So there's a lot of Germans in here. And then when they attack here, in this area, they get absolutely smoked. The Germans just get hammered. And there's I'll stop now, but there's a real neat comment from Gordon Brown, who commanded D Company of the Regina Rifles Regiment, which is actually holding Cardenville Farm, which is right in about here. And he said, we couldn't figure out what they were doing. Doctrine says you don't attack at night unless you have infantry support, and you don't attack in daylight with infantry unless you have tank support. And the Germans just did everything backwards. They came charging in with tanks and we shot them all to pieces. Then the tanks withdrew in the morning and the infantry came in and we killed all them. And at the risk of offending you, I asked the commanding officer of my father's field artillery regiment, some of you may have known him, Colonel Clifford. He's about this tall, fairly foul-mouthed, even at 92. I said, what did you think of your doctrine? What did you think of how your army fought? What did you think of the Germans? He said, oh, the Germans. He said, the Germans did stupid things, and we killed those bastards in large numbers. The only person who's written that in the publication is me, but you won't find it in the textbooks. So, all by way of saying, the Canadians are where they're supposed to be, and their job is to stop the major German Panzer threat to the whole Normandy beaches. And they do it for about 3 days, and a final point, keep coming to a final point. If you read the 21st Army Group's intelligence log for September 7th, 8th, and 9th, it says things like, not sure where the 12th SS is. They seem to be missing on the battlefield. Now, I don't know what that means. Does that mean that 3rd Div's not pushing information up the line? And by the time they find out where it is, most of it is shot up and there's 3,000 Canadian killed and wounded. And so 3rd Division kind of shoots its bolt, doing what it's asked to do, stopping. This is where Schweppenberg says we can't get the start line for the Panzer attack, and I don't know whether it was Kurt Meyer or somebody said, what do we do now? And that's when he throws out these lines. Make peace, you fool. You know, and stomps off. But they can't get the start line for the Panzer assault. And then the Panzer divisions get dissipated and stopping the Brits, Bayeux and the Brits further on. And so our guys do what they're asked to do. And they do it exceptionally well against odds which are much, much greater than historians have allowed. And it's part of the original Cossack plan. So we're not just advancing into space. If you read the op order, it says, read all the other op orders, it says, you will take this position and hold against local counterattacks over the bridges left, right, and center. If you read the Canadian op order, it says, you will take your position and stop the counterattack. Full period. It doesn't say local counterattacks. It doesn't say, you know, counterattacks to your left, to your right, or over the bridges, or over the hill. It just says, stop the counterattack. And that's what we do. And that's what I'm writing about. And I'm going to stop. Thank you. All right. A few minutes, John.
Well, it's been, in the last couple of years, a real pleasure reading some of the books that have been coming out about the First World War and myth-busting. You know, the lines led by donkeys and cavalry of no account and all the rest of it.
Yep.
So now you've got me excited. When's your book on this coming out?
Just as soon as I can get home and finish the last 2 chapters. I've been trying to do that since August.
Okay.
My target for this one is obviously, and I have to tell you that it wasn't originally the spring of '44 or spring of 2014 because I hoped to have it done 2 years earlier. But now I'm thinking in a rather mercenary fashion. Like, hey, there's like an anniversary coming up. So I would expect to see it in the spring of 2014, if not sooner. That would be the plan.
Well, I think you got some sales here.
Well, it's a really neat subject, and I don't wish to slag Colonel Stacy. I have gone through all his papers, and what I can say about the original official history is that Stacy was not working with all the information. I went back and looked at, he made a request in about 1947 or 48 to get copies of the Cossack planning documents. And what the Canadian Defense Liaison Staff, or whatever it was, the Army liaison officer sent, was a typed summary of the main points of the last iteration of the plan in January, February of '44. So it's a compilation It's not an original document, and it's certainly not comprehensive. So when he got around to writing his account of what is it we're supposed to do, I don't think he knew. I really don't think he knew. And which makes me wonder whether anybody else was thinking about that at that time, or whether I just made all this up. Right? It's in the Cossack planning, but
Cossack planning, as I gather, took place over the space of about a year previous to D-Day.
yep.
Are you able to know, are we able to know, what impact events on the Eastern Front had on Cossack planning in terms of what they knew of varying strengths in Normandy, German strengths?
I haven't seen any of that, but I have seen direct connections between what's going on in Italy and Cossack planning. They're actually tracking particularly the landings at Salerno, and then going back and looking at the original American landing at Gela in Sicily, and saying, this is clear proof that Germans will hit us hard as soon as we're ashore, and they'll hit us with armored forces, and we have to be ready. So the British conception of planning is actually quite different from the American conception. The Americans have this idea that you'll just get ashore and just keep rolling, right? The Brits have a very clear idea that your job is to get ashore quickly, to get dug in. One of the reasons why, I mean, ask my father, said, you guys landing on D-Day, all the kit they have, 13th Field, all the Canadian units land with M7 priests, self-propelled guns. Had a picture of it. My father had a Thompson. You know, you're not supposed to have Thompson submachine guns in Northwest Europe. That's what he had. The Americans land their guns, towed guns, on Omaha Beach. Actually, they don't land them because they all sink. They bring them in ducks, and the idea is that they'll swim the ducks up to the beach, those big amphibious trucks, then they'll crane the gun out, drop it on the beach, turn it around, open the things, and start firing. And the Brits look at that and they go, I don't think so. Because when the Germans hit you, they're going to hit you fast. So all the artillery should be self-propelled. It's not strictly true. 2 of the regiments assigned to Canadians were 25-pounder towed. They were supposed to come in at D+1 and D+2. All the anti-tank artillery should be self-propelled because you've got to get inshore and dig in. Then you need to receive, and then you need to counterattack. And you can't be pulling guns over the beach. You need to actually have the gun pointed at the enemy when you're going in. And so they're very conscious of what's going on in Italy, what's going on in the Mediterranean. And it reinforces their planning because they've already decided as early as the spring of '43 that the Germans are going to hit you hard with mechanized forces, and that means the landing itself has to be mechanized. And what's really neat, I mean, everyone talks about, you know, America, the home of Ford, you know, Americans are all have the greatest kit and all that kind of Gucci stuff. The people who land with all the Gucci kit on D-Day are the Brits. Armored vehicles, Royal Engineers, Avery's, yeah, Percy Hobart, 79th Division, all the stuff that you need to actually fight a modern war and get through fortified defense, it's all Brit. The Americans don't even, most of their artillery actually doesn't get ashore because it sinks, quite apart from their tanks. Right? If 3rd Canadian Division gets 90 of its own 96 artillery pieces up for this battle, the 2 British divisions are delayed. They don't get there actually D+4, D+5. They're a bit late. If our artillery had been either self-towed like the American ones, or it suffered the same fate as American artillery, in some cases whole battalions just disappear at sea, they would have got wiped out. The Germans, when they attack here around Bretteville, Puto, Nori, there's a whole bunch of times where the 12th SS don't get out of their trenches. And you read the German accounts and they say, well, we attacked, particularly when Lieutenant Henry gets his, should have got a VC for killing 5 Panzers with 5 shots in 4 minutes right here. The infantry was supposed to attack. Well, as soon as the Panthers began to move, they put fire down on the infantry positions around it on a scale 5, right? That's 5 rounds per gun. And they did it as a division level shoot. So you got 90 guns firing 5 rounds down on top of the infantry positions, and then they hit them with medium fire. German infantry didn't move. Right? Just like Clifford said, the Germans did stupid things, and we killed the. I asked him, he said, you know, you maintain a curtain of fire. He said, oh, that's bullshit. We didn't maintain a curtain of fire. It was concentrations. Great. When the 12th SS attacked Cardenville Farm, Gordon Brown's company position, he's down to 39 men. It's just like Fort Apache. They'd already fought off a whole bunch of attacks. Then this whole German company comes swarming over the rail line. And he finally makes contact with Clifford. Clifford said, get your men down, I'll have fire there in about a minute. And he just gave out the order that said, get down, fire's incoming. And you can talk, it's in Gordon Brown's account. He said the fire virtually creased the top of the wall. and just shredded the German infantry that was attacking and ended the attack. I'm not suggesting, as Walter Keith did at one point, he charged me with, you know, downplaying the role of the infantry. But the reason they have all that artillery there is to kill this kind of stuff, to check them, and it works. The problem is, if you're moving in 3 or 2,000 meter tactical bounds based on artillery, you aren't getting to Berlin in a week. Right? So historians get really impatient. Particularly post-war armchair generals. Fraser?
You've given most of the talk looking down from the beaches at our position, and you had red arrows of the German. How close was the Cossack estimate of what the Germans would do to what they actually did?
It's almost spot on. And in fact, I don't know if you can get to the last slide, Chris. Is there another one in there? There should be one more. Mention it. Anyway, it may pop up. No, I got to go the other way. Right at the bitter end. When von Kluge takes over as German Army Commander in Normandy on the 4th of July and replaces Rommel, first thing he does is he plans an attack up either side of the Meuse River Valley. He can leave it off. That's the first thing that's on his agenda a month into the Normandy campaign. If you look at where his assembly point is and where he wants to go, it goes straight through the position held by the Canadians in the first week ashore. So that focus on that ground is consistent. It is the best tank country. There's good tank country north of Caen, and if the Brits had taken Caen on D-Day, then it all would have rested on this space. But because they don't, there's some local counterattacks. Just a final point I have to tell you, I think one of the reasons why you never read anything about 21st Panzer in this battle, if you read the trial of Kurt Meyer, one of the consistent questions was, there we go, there's von Kluge's attack, straight up through this area, assembly around 30 Harkar. One of the consistent questions in the Kurt Meyer trial for war crimes, as a part of that battle against the North Novas up here in D+1, is, Colonel, were the Germans who shot your men dressed in camouflage uniforms, or were they wearing camouflage smocks? And usually the answer was, I can't really remember. Yeah. And why the distinction? 21st Panzer fought in their shelter half, camo smock. 12th SS had a camo uniform. So was 21st Panzer implicated in the shooting of about 48 North Novas and Sherbrooke Fusiliers and Camerons? Possibly. But if I was 21st Panzer, I wouldn't describe my participation in that. That's all about Kurt Meyer and the SS and the murder of Canadians. So there may be something post-war where they just say, that's not going to go there. I'm not going to talk about 21st Panzer. But neither did Stacy, because I don't think Stacy knew where 21st Panzer was when he wrote the official history. I really don't. So, a little hard on Stacy, but there's a whole lot they don't know, and they get the history out and it's done and it's out there, but it's nowhere near complete. It hadn't even begun to scratch the surface. And we're working away at that. I think I probably have to bolt because one last one?
Under the Cossack plan, it seems that on D-Day they were going to consolidate on a ridge close to the beach and then move on to Caen in subsequent days.
The original Cossack plan called for, the consolidation around the Somerview Basseville Ridge here,
right.
And then on D+1 there would be a dash. And sometimes the dash is accompanied by an airborne landing on Caen. And this is a time when there are very few Germans in Western France. Okay. So the idea of this kind of, charge of the light brigade across the plains of northern France down to Caen is probably not too fanciful. They probably would have done it. Whether they would have had the forces to hold all that area afterwards, I think is another matter entirely. One of the things that Freddie Morgan seemed to be consistently upset about at the end was the withdrawal of an airborne drop on Caen. And I'm going to argue in this book that the British, as soon as they moved 21st Panzer into the Caen area, 3rd British Division no longer has the combat power to take Caen. It's not an option. And I think they know that. In fact, if you read the final plan, there's a fudge in it. It says, you guys have to all take Caen, but if you can't do that, here's what you should do. And it's always clear that there's a kind of fallback. Caen sits in a bit of a bowl, and they want them to take basically the top of the bowl and hold it against the Germans. So there's always a fallback position. But the Canadian plan makes better sense if Caen is held by the British, because there's only one way the Germans can go then, and that's straight at us. And I think that was always part of the plan. So we get some of the heavy lifting in the Normandy planning, and you won't find that in the literature anywhere, but maybe in 18 months.
On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for listening to us today. Watch for announcements of future event transcripts, and we hope that you will be able to join us in person for our regular speakers events. Once again, thank you for tuning into our podcasts, and have a wonderful day.